Hello, I'm David Hedges, and I've been a tour guide here in New Orleans since 2011, and today it is my pleasure to show you the French Quarter. Often looked down upon as touristy, the French Quarter is more than big-ass beers on bourbon and tacky t-shirt shops. It is quite possibly the oldest continuously occupied neighborhood in the United States. Full of intact 19th century structures, it is completely unique, and it is a very special place. To understand the history of the French Quarter, you need to understand the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River starts thousands of miles up north and winds its way down here. Along the way, it picks up water and sediment from every major river in the middle of America. And over the course of many hundreds of years, that sediment has deposited itself along the bend of the river right here. This is known as a natural levee, and it's basically a big pile of mud. But it is here that Bienville, a French Canadian, decided would be his best option for building a new city to gain control of the Mississippi River for the French. Besides the natural levee, the biggest reason he picked this location is that it was already a popular trading location among the area's indigenous population. The Homa and the Natchez would both use this location to trade with others, some as far north as present-day Minnesota, and some as far south as Central America. It's like building your truck stop on our already existing off-ramp. Bienville, the city's founder, hired Pogger, a French engineer, to draw plans for the city in 1718, and from this location you can see the original square the city was planned around, Place d'Armes. This square was originally Place d'Armes, an open, muddy square where the French military would parade every morning and raise up a French flag where you see that statue of Andrew Jackson today. It is also where they had public executions. So maybe not the best place to spend your vacation walking around. You'll see similar public squares in other Spanish and French cities, along with towns across Mexico. It has changed quite a bit from its original design, which we'll talk about next. The square was redesigned in 1850 by wealthy French Creole real estate developer named Michael Almonester Baroness de Pontabla, or more commonly referred to as the Baroness Pontabla. She based the design on public parks she had enjoyed in Paris. Do you notice it says Major General Andrew Jackson and not President Andrew Jackson? She picked a statue of Andrew Jackson because of his local popularity due to the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, where Andrew Jackson had led the United States to victory against the British. As president in 1828, he passed the Indian Removal Act, forcing indigenous Americans from their land in the Trail of Tears. Historians today would argue it was a genocide. But he's not exactly here for anything he did do, but more what he represented to people later in the 19th century. These identical buildings ahead of you flank the square and are American townhomes that the Baroness built as investment properties back in 1850. The Baroness had the cast iron custom made and features her monogram. There's an A for Almonester, which was her father's name, and a P for Pontabla, which was her husband's name. The properties were donated to the government and are still rented out today. Ahead of you is St. Louis Cathedral, the oldest cathedral in the United States. It was originally built as a simple church, which fell over in a hurricane in 1719, rebuilt, then destroyed in a fire in 1788, and again in 1794. So what you see today was built in 1794. This section of charters is permanently closed to automobiles, giving street performers, tarot readers, and artists a place to do their thing. On the left is the Cabildo. Cabildo is a Spanish word for city council, and you might see cabildos all over the world in former Spanish colonies. You will also see a nearly identical building on the right. That's the Presbyteria, which means priest's house. Both are now state museums and worth checking out. If the left door of the cathedral is open, you can stroll in and look around. A stroll down Pirates Alley is a must for any walk around the French Quarter. Stop and look down. Can you see the original drain in the middle of the alley? Back then, French Quarter residents emptied their chamber pots right into the street, hoping for rain to make it someone else's problem. Up ahead of you is a pirate-themed bar, Pirates Alley Cafe, famous for their absinthe. New Orleans has a long, storied history with pirates, which we'll talk about later. Behind the Cabildo is the old arsenal. In 1811, there was a slave uprising in the German coast area. Rebelling slaves were attempting to get here to gain access to firearms. The uprising was put down before they could make it. Surrounding the city back then were sugar plantations, Sugar was extremely profitable but labor-intensive, so slaves were routinely worked to death in the sugar harvest. The French Quarter was a center for the slave trade in the South. Across the street is Antoine's, which is the oldest restaurant in New Orleans. It was opened in 1840 and is most famous for inventing oysters Rockefeller. I think the best way to explain New Orleans food is by talking about gumbo. To make a gumbo, you start with a roux, butter and flour, which is French. But here in New Orleans, your butter might not keep in the long hot summer, so many locals substituted lard, which has a much higher smoking point, meaning you can make a much darker roux. This is known as a chocolate roux. The word gumbo comes from a West African word for okra. Another common ingredient in gumbo is filet, which is dried sassafras leaves. This comes from indigenous people. Pralines are a local sweet treat made with pecans, sugar, and butter, and Leah's have been making them since 1944. Inside, you'll enjoy the wonderful smells. Coming up on the left is Lefit in Exile. This is the oldest gay bar in the South. Many gay men flocked to the French Quarter because of New Orleans' more laid-back attitudes in the mid-20th century. Many of the men who preserved the historic buildings in the French Quarter were gay. Lefit's blacksmith shop on the next block was operated as a bar called Café Lefit's in the mid-1940s by a man named Roger Kaplinger, who hosted drag shows and was frequented by writers like Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams. It turned out that in 1953, Kaplinger had never actually had a clear title to the bar and had just been squatting it for years. By the late 1960s, he opened a new bar, the one you just passed, and as a joke, he called it Café Lefit's in Exile. Coming up here on your left is one of the oldest buildings in the French Quarter, Lefit's blacksmith shop. The exact date of the building's construction is unknown, but generally, it's believed to date back somewhere between 1750 and 1770. This means it's one of the few buildings to have survived both disastrous fires and one of the few buildings from the French colonial area. Yes, it is ironic that it's called the French Quarter, as it's not very French, at least architecturally speaking. The building is most famous for being owned and operated as a blacksmith shop by Pierre Lefit in the early 19th century. Pierre's much more famous brother was the pirate Lefit, Jean. The brother operated a smuggling and piracy operation west of here in the swamps until his brother's arrest in 1815. Andrew Jackson had just arrived to lead American forces against the British and offered the brothers a pardon in exchange for working for the U.S. military, a deal they gladly accepted. With the brothers' help, the U.S. Army, led by Andrew Jackson, easily defeated the British Army in the Battle of New Orleans. Shortly after the battle, Jean Lefit left town to continue being a pirate, using Galveston, Texas as a base, till he was caught by the Spanish Navy. It is still a mystery to this day what happened. Some believing he escaped and he lived out the rest of his days under an assumed name in North Carolina. Today, the bar is known for its Voodoo Daiquiri, a purple-colored frozen cocktail. And that's our little walk around the French Quarter today. Like and subscribe. I will be making more videos like this. This is the first, almost a test of what I'm going to offer. We also, NOLA Tour Guide also offers daily walking tours that are free to join of the French Quarter, the Garden District, cemeteries, and lots of other things. Check us out at www.nolatourguide.com. There will be a link in the description, obviously. And there's also, we have audio tours, very affordably priced audio tours. And you can check those out in the description as well. Thank you for joining us. And like I said, like and subscribe. Come back for more.